Hi, I'm Gina Gleason with Real Impact, and so excited to have you join us tonight for our town hall. We have great guests every month to come and talk about some of the best issues that you need to talk about with your families and friends. So tonight we've invited two of the best insiders when it comes to California issues. We've invited Jonathan Keller, who is the director of California Family Council. And tonight, Jonathan is going to give you an update about what's happening with AB 2223, the infanticide bill, which recently just had some changes last week. He's also going to talk about what's happening in California regarding the March for Life. We've all heard about the March for Life that takes place in Washington, D.C. every year. Many of us can't get there, but this year you're going to have the opportunity to come to California and join the March for Life, and Jonathan is going to give details about how you can join that march. Also, we have Dr. Stefan Bean, a new friend that I'm just so honored to have with us today. And he's going to talk about his experience as an educator, his role as a superintendent, as a teacher. He's going to talk about what parents need to know about dealing with the superintendent and school board in their district, and just give you an insight about what's happening in California. So please welcome our two guests, Jonathan Keller and Dr. Stefan Bean. Glad to have you join us, gentlemen.
Thanks, Gina.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Jonathan, I've been working for many, many years, and we talk quite often, and because we're always working on fighting bad legislation that is coming out of Sacramento.
A never-ending job.
Well, because it's just nonstop. Every year there's thousands and thousands of bills that are introduced, and Jonathan is one of the people that helps me understand what it is that is coming out of the state of California that is against our values, our faith, that hurts our children in the public schools. So I'm going to let Jonathan talk a little bit about his background,
Sure.
And then we'll get into some of those other topics.
Sure. Well, thank you, Gina. And it's great to be with all of you today, both here in person and watching at home. It's been really a blessing to get to work alongside Gina and Pastor Jack and the whole family here at Calvary Chapel Chino Hills for, this is the 9th year. I started in 2014, and working with California Family Council, we have an office in Fresno, which is where I live, with my wife Julia and our two beautiful little boys, Hudson and Wesley. And then we also have an office up in Sacramento, which is where we do a lot of the analysis for public policy, whether it's legislation or executive orders from Governor Newsom, all that type of stuff. And our organization, just as a quick background, our mission is advancing God's design for life, family, and liberty through California's church, capital, and culture. So we love working with churches like CCCH, pastors like Pastor Jack, and it is just incredible to see all the opportunities that God has given us here in the Golden State. Gina, I know that it's true that whenever we travel around the country, I'm sure you get the same thing. People say, oh my gosh, is California really that bad? I mean, and in some ways it's true. There's a lot of challenges that we have, whether we're talking about the public school system, whether we're talking about the pro-life issue, but at the same time, it's a huge opportunity for us to stand up for God's truth. And it's a great ability for us to really show that God's salt and light is needed in California as much as it is anywhere. So that's something that I love doing at California Family Council. And specifically, if you wouldn't mind, you mentioned the March for Life, if I could tackle that one first. I've been privileged to go to the March for Life several times over the last few years. I attended my very first march actually back in 2001. I was a high school student, and I was a senior in high school. I was 18, and it was an amazing experience. We attended the March for Life on the 22nd. 2 days before that, in January, we attended President Bush's first inaugural parade. And it was amazing, and it's hard to believe now that, 21 years later, we're looking at potentially next year's March for Life being the first ever post-Roe v. Wade March for Life.
Miracle.
What incredible changes. On the one hand, it's hard to believe it's been 49 years of Roe v. Wade and legalized abortion from the Supreme Court, but on the other hand, what a momentous time to be alive and to be involved in the pro-life movement. So it's very unique and a special time. So for those of you who have never been back to the march in DC, it's very cold. There's usually a ton of snow and gigantic crowds, 500,000 people. That's part of the reason why my wife has not made that journey back with me yet. She is not thrilled about bundling up those two little guys and pushing them alongside 500,000 other people. Even if they're friendly people, that's a lot of people. So if you want something that is a little closer to home and a little bit more manageable to start with, this year's march, the California March for Life, is going to be on Wednesday, June 22nd at the Capitol in Sacramento. And the rally is going to begin at 11 a.m., and then the march is going to be at noon. We have a phenomenal lineup of speakers, including some legislators here from the state of California. We have a state legislator from Louisiana, Senator Katrina Jackson, who wrote a pro-life bill that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. We have Lila Rose, who's going to be coming and speaking. And we've had just an incredible turnout of people in the past. This is our second year doing this. And we're expecting a gigantic crowd. So we really encourage you all to attend. If you'd like more information, you can go to our website, californiafamily.org. We have a button right at the top that says March for Life. You can sign up. It's free. There's no cost to attend. And we encourage you, whether you're flying up for the day or make a couple-day trip out of it. Come to the Capitol, visit your legislators, walk around Sacramento and meet people. But it's Gina, I think, going to be an incredibly important opportunity because we know our friends on the other side of the aisle, they are not taking these decisions or these announcements from the Supreme Court lying down. I mean, they are mobilizing. They are being aggressive. And I think it is that much more important for us as pro-life citizens, as people of faith, to really stand up and say that we love every single unborn child in the state of California and around the world. But we also love their mothers. And I think that's really the message that we're going to have, is that there is no need for abortion in a state that is as plentiful and as well-resourced as California. And I'm excited to see the church rise up and meet the needs that are going to come after the Supreme Court decision.
So tell us a little bit about that day. What does it look like? Do people meet at the Capitol? Is there a location? How long does it last?
So the event starts at 11 a.m. And the good thing about that is if you were going to be driving, it'd be a little bit of a long drive up from Southern California, but you could do it. You could still make it there by 11 a.m. But we're especially having it set so that if people need to fly in from other parts of the state, you have plenty of time to get up, get to the airport, fly in, and then get there to the Capitol. We will have some people, I think, showing up to start setting up. There's a few different organizations that have booths or ministries that have kind of resource tables. They'll be arriving probably closer to 10, and then the actual event itself will start right at 11 a.m. sharp. And that event, it's going to be on the steps of the Capitol. You can actually go, again, to the website, californiafamily.org. You can see a map of the entire route and a map of what everything will look like. And very simply, no chairs. Since it's a short presentation, we're just going to have people stand up there on the lawn and on the steps of the Capitol. They'll listen to some amazing speakers. If any of you came to the Capitol for Pastor Jack's amazing speech a couple weeks ago with AB 2223, very similar layout, very similar setup. We will have large speakers. The one thing, Gina, I will say, we have bigger speakers this time. So everybody will be able to hear. Last time with Pastor Jack, the speakers, there were so many people, we needed more speakers. So this time we were going to have gigantic speakers. They're going to be blasting everybody, all the thousands of people that are there in the audience. And we're very excited about that. So the thing that's great, Gina, about the March for Life also is that we're doing it on a Wednesday, not on a Saturday, because we want the legislators themselves to hear us. We want them to know that there are thousands of their constituents from all across this great state that are there on the steps in Sacramento that are very concerned about the pro-life issue. I think, Gina, a lot of times people in Sacramento, you know this, they just think that if you're not a Democrat, you don't exist. They want to write anybody off if they have a traditional view of God's design for the family or of parents' rights and responsibilities for raising their kids. And on the pro-life issue, if you don't believe in unrestricted abortion on demand and that California taxpayers should pay for it, they just think that your opinion doesn't matter. But that's why we want to be here. We want to show them that we do exist, we vote, and we care about these issues very, very deeply.
And especially right now that they had the nerve to introduce AB 2223.
Right.
And we need to show that we're still here, we're going to keep fighting back because they're not going to be done this
Right.
year. Next year, they're going to bring it back again. And the same people that were very passionate about fighting at this time, they need to continue the fight and show up at this event. So
That's right.
once they get there to the Capitol, they're going to listen to the speakers. Then you actually march down the street.
We do, and we're actually, last year it was a smaller group, so we just marched on the lawn around. This year, because we're anticipating such a large turnout, we've actually worked with the police department, and we're going to do what they call a rolling street closure. So we're going to go into the streets, like all those amazing marches you see on TV. We're going to march all the way around the perimeter of the Capitol. They're on 10th Street, L Street, down to N Street, and then back up to, I think it's 14th Street. And we're going to literally march all the way around the entire Capitol Park. The police are going to be following us. It's going to be very safe. But I'm excited about that because it's going to be something that both the legislators and the surrounding community, I mean, we know that there are a lot of businesses. We know that there are some legislators that have houses or they live right there downtown. Lobbyists that have offices or living space right there downtown. So they're going to not be able to ignore the fact that the pro-life community is alive and strong here in the state of California. And something that I love about this event so much, Gina, is that every time we come, it really is a complete, across the spectrum. You have all ages, you have all races.
So children.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You've got everybody from across the pro-life spectrum that is there. And one thing I'll point out also, one of the speakers, Senator Jackson that I mentioned, she's from Louisiana. She is an African-American Democrat, but she's pro-life.
Great.
And the reason that she's coming is we want to remind the legislators in Sacramento and all of our Democrat friends across the state, even if you have voted Democrat your entire life, it doesn't mean that you have to be pro-abortion. You too can be pro-life, just like Senator Jackson.
Well, because it's obvious for anyone, Democrats especially, to see how left their party has gone, having the nerve, again, I say, to introduce a bill that allows a baby, once it's born, outside of the womb, up to 28 to 30 days to be neglected to the point of death.
That's right.
Does that not show extremism?
I think it absolutely does. And for those of you who don't know, if somehow you've missed everything Gina and Pastor Jack have been talking about for the last 3 months, AB 2223, this was a bill by Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks, and it has now been amended multiple times. And every time they've amended it, they've said, well, the extremists don't think that, they don't like this bill, and we reject all of their characterizations.
We're the extremists.
But we're going to amend it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's what they keep trying to do, is they try to say there's nothing to see here, but here, we're going to change all these things. And that's what this latest amendment is, Gina. They basically, even though they've been trying to do fact checks, the statements you and I have made have been fact checked by Reuters and Politico and all these different groups, Sacramento Bee, and yet Buffy Wicks herself acknowledged that we were right by amending the bill a third time.
Absolutely.
And I think there's no reason to pass yet another amendment if you're not concerned about the effects of this bill and the fact that it could lead to children up to 30 days old being neglected to the point of death. But the problem is, I think some people might have seen that headline that the bill was amended and said, great, we're done. We can pop the champagne, we can celebrate, we can all be excited, but the reality is, it's true that they amended this one tiny section, but the rest of the bill in total is horrible. I mean,
Absolutely.
It still prohibits coroners from investigating suspicious perinatal deaths. Mm-hmm. It still says that if a coroner or a law enforcement officer tries to investigate, they open themselves up for liability. They could be sued for up to $25,000 just because they're concerned about the circumstances surrounding the death of a newborn child. And in addition to that, Gina, something that has gotten almost no public publicity about this is the fact that this bill explicitly legalizes abortion to the day of birth, as long as it is performed by the woman herself or by someone who is assisting her. So even if in the state of California or the Supreme Court said, well, there has to be a gestational age limit. This bill explicitly says up to the moment of birth, a woman has that right to choose to terminate a pregnancy, which we know really means killing a child.
Yeah.
And that was not amended. That language is still in this bill.
Pretty much everything's the same. And I know that there are some people who are happy that that's been amended, and hands off, they feel like, okay, we've done our part.
Yeah.
But that's not the way you and I feel.
That's
and
right.
a lot of other people feel.
Yeah, and look, I'm as happy about the amendment as anybody. I think it shows that those 2,000 plus people that Pastor Jack brought to the Capitol with him, there was a huge coalition on April 19th. Men and women from across the state came to the Capitol. They stood up, they made their voices heard. We spoke out in opposition to the bill. That's a huge victory. I think that every person who made the drive or the flight up to Sacramento, who stood in line for hours waiting to testify, every one of those people gets to take credit for part of this victory and the fact that it was amended. But it's not enough.
It's not enough, no.
And I think just as, I think as an example from the country of Ukraine, just as I could use an example, I think it's a great thing that Russia did not take over the capital of Ukraine. But Russia is still attacking, they're still invading, they're still inside the country. So it would be really silly if they said, great, they didn't capture the capital, so I guess we can stop fighting now. No. And we need to be as zealous and as proactive about protecting life in this state as our opponents are.
And didn't you notice, Jonathan, that there were people that were new to the fight? I noticed and talked to a lot of people that had never participated in anything like that at the Capitol. First time there, they didn't know they can do these things. They didn't know that they can go visit their legislator. They didn't know how to do it, and all of that was about helping these people experience that, how to make a real stand that caused people to notice. And because I think of all the pushback that we did, all the groups in California, Buffy had to amend that bill.
That's right.
Because it was being noticed all across the country.
That's right.
Pastor Jack had been interviewed so many times about this bill because people were really paying attention. And she couldn't deny it any longer. So what this says is that we were correct in our analysis of this bill.
That's right.
It truly was an infanticide bill. And she denied it. She denied it when she testified. She so proudly talked about her abortion. And I mean, it's just really difficult to understand how these people think.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, she repeatedly said, and then everyone else, when you read all the breathless commentary online, all these fact checks, they said, well, Assemblywoman Wicks says that it's not her intention that the bill would be used to allow infanticide. Well, but the problem is, Assemblywoman Wicks isn't the person enforcing this bill. It's going to be judges. And they're not going to go by the feelings or the opinions.
Intentions don't matter.
It's going to be what is the text, what is the statutory language that it would be in California law. And that's why dozens of attorneys, both from the state of California and around the country, looked at this and said, this is deeply problematic. And I mean, again, kudos to Assemblywoman Wicks. I guess I should say thank you for at least finally getting the memo and listening about this section. But, as I said in my press release after we saw the news, I just hope she withdraws the entire thing. I mean, that would be the better thing to do because this bill is dangerous and deadly all the way around.
And we still have momentum.
We do.
This momentum has to keep going. People have to keep fighting, keep calling, keep showing up, because what they did was effective. And so tell us about what people should be doing at this step.
Yeah, so I would remind people, the bill actually was being heard just this week, and we're expecting that it's most likely going to have hearings in the Senate within the next couple of weeks. And I think we need to use the exact same playbook that we've used while it was in the Assembly and switch it over to the Senate. Every single senator that is on any committee that this bill is referred to needs to have a complete barrage of phone calls, emails, faxes, handwritten letters. And that includes especially those people, if you're a constituent, if you live in the state where one of those senators is elected, or the region where one of those senators is elected, you need to call. But even just across the state, we should be calling all of the senators on these committees. Gina, you know, when you and I were there at the Capitol a few weeks ago, some of the office staff were kind of annoyed when they saw us because they literally were getting a new phone call every 30 seconds. I mean, they couldn't barely hang up the phone from one phone call before it was ringing again with someone else raising concerns about this bill. And I think that's the exact same playbook that we need to follow. We need to do it at both their Senate offices at the Capitol in Sacramento, but also at their district offices. Everybody, every one of their staff members needs to dread the very mention of this bill.
Absolutely.
They should realize that it is completely toxic, it's radioactive. Nobody should want to be associated with AB 2223.
Absolutely. So the next step is actually, it's on the floor. So when do you think that vote might take place?
Well, it's actually happening sometime this week, and I think that's what we're waiting on. It's possible that sometimes they don't always update us on the latest information, but it's possible that the vote could be today, earlier today on Friday, or it could be on Saturday. One thing that I think we've seen is that even when there are deadlines that they say they're supposed to have, they kind of can fudge those a little bit. So I'm expecting at least by the beginning of next week, we'll know what the next step is.
Okay, so we need to just be relentless.
Yep.
Pick up the phone, write the letters, make the office visits, whatever you can to make
Come
sure
to the Capitol.
Come to the Capitol and make sure that these legislators know exactly where you stand on defending the unborn.
And
the born.
Yes.
And the born.
Well, and that's one reason why I think it's so providential that the March for Life is on June 22nd at the Capitol. Because now, all of that momentum, everybody that's been doing things in their local communities, they can come back to the Capitol on June 22nd, and they will be able to go around either in the morning before the march, or the march is going to be short. It's only going to go from about noon to 1:30. It's only about a 2-mile loop, so it'll be very easy to do. And you can grab a quick bite to eat, and then you can go right over to your legislator's office and just say, hey, I just marched for life. I came all the way from Chino Hills or from Fontana or San Diego or Redding. I mean, wherever you are watching this, come to the Capitol, and you can tell your legislators that day, I traveled all this way. I made this investment. I brought my kids, I brought my family, we marched, and now we're telling you, please oppose AB 2223.
So how do people get this information to their churches?
So again, if you go to our website, californiafamily.org, we have a lot of information there that you can share directly with churches. We also have some downloadable resources, including bulletin inserts, flyers, PowerPoint slides. If anybody is watching this and they ask, man, how can my church get more involved? How can I rally people to come? I would encourage you, ask your pastor if you can plan a trip. Maybe you can rent a van. Maybe you could even rent a bus. We have certain groups around the state that are renting 55-passenger buses and making the trip all the way to the Capitol. And in addition to that, I would encourage people, drive yourself, depending on how far you are from the Capitol, but also I would really request if you'd pray for us as we're preparing for this, because, I mean, Gina, we've all seen over the last few weeks the uptick in opposition from the radical abortion industry. My good friend, Julaine Appling, who runs the Wisconsin Family Institute, her office was actually attacked the weekend after that Supreme Court decision was released. People spray painted on the side of her building. They threw Molotov cocktails into the windows. And she, thank God, was not hurt, but her office suffered significant damage. And I think that we're starting to see that there is a real spiritual battle going on here as well. So I would just ask you, whether you come to the Capitol or not, please pray with us. Commit to fast and pray leading up to this event on June 22nd, that God would really be with us, that we would have an amazing turnout, that it would be safe. The police, I have to say, are fantastic. We didn't have any incidents last year, but we want it to stay that way this year. So I would ask you, for your churches, ask them to pray, ask them to show that slide, and look at bringing people up yourself.
I think it's going to be a great turnout, and it's so fantastic that we're seeing the younger generation understand what abortion is. And so now the people that you're dealing with in the public schools Many of them are pro-life because they've seen the videos, they've seen the sonograms, they've seen the babies that are viable. And at the same time, they're bringing all of this propaganda into the public school system. And I know you don't like that, Dr. Stefan. So talk a little bit about your background and why you're in the position you're in today, why you're running for school superintendent, and what you're seeing in the schools.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for having me, Gina. You know, as I reflect on my 25 years of service in education as a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, and most recently a superintendent, I've just realized that God called me into this field to give back to what saved my life. And I tell a lot of people that God has a plan for our country. He wants to save our country from what we're seeing right now. But we have to really start with saving our children. And and I tell people, God is in the business of saving. He saved my life. I was born in Vietnam in 1971. During the Vietnam War. And my parents were so poor because of the war. When I contracted polio, which left me paralyzed from the waist down, they abandoned me on the streets of Saigon. And it was an orphanage that came and saved my life. So God saved me through this orphanage. They took care of me for a couple years, and then in 1975, President Ford executed Operation Baby Lift. And what that was the U.S. military was to come into Vietnam, airlift Vietnamese orphans to the United States to then be adopted. And I remember the day pretty vividly, even as a 4-year-old. The tensions were high. It was very chaotic. There were, staff just scrambling around to get these orphans on these planes. It was so chaotic that they put my records and my braces on one plane, and I was just tossed on another plane. Well, that plane took off and it crashed. Over 160 orphans died that day. So I made it safely to the United States, and that's just another example that God saved my life. And then I was adopted into a wonderful family, Gregory and Judy Bean. Gregory was a 6th grade teacher. And on a 6th grade teacher, he provided for our family of 12 kids. So I had 11 brothers and sisters. And most of those kids were adopted. So 10 of them were adopted because our parents had foster babies come and go. And these babies would come in, stay with us for 3 weeks, 3 months, and then be adopted. So when I hear this issue about abortion, it just breaks my heart because there are other ways that we can save our kids. Yeah. We do not need to murder our babies. That's right. You know, there are plenty of families out there that are willing to adopt a baby. In fact, I just talked to a friend that has been waiting 3 years to adopt. And yet we are killing babies by the millions.
Oh. That's right.
It's incredible. And so my mother had this heart for children, and she took care of them. My father knew that I would struggle when I came to the United States. He saw that in a new country, learning a new language, with a disability, all the surgeries I had as a child, he knew the only way that I would overcome them is if he were to center raising us around faith in God, around family. We needed to support one another as a family, and then around education. And he instilled in me this love and passion for education, so much so that since I was struggling in the public school system at the time, they put me into private school, and that's where I would meet Donald Geisinger, amazing teacher. Donald Geisinger was a 6th grade teacher who looked at me, looked beyond my disability, beyond the fact that I was using crutches and in a wheelchair, and saw the God-given gifts that I had. And one of those gifts was this gift of gab. And so Don Geisinger said, Stefan, I just want you to give oral presentations for the rest of this year. No, you don't need to write. And so I did. And that act alone led to a pathway where I was asked to speak in front of 15,000 people at Washington, D.C. on behalf of the disabled as a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Amazing.
And we, as educators, need to do that. We need to look at our students from an asset perspective. Look at the strengths that they possess, the gifts that God has given them. versus what we hear all the time, oh, our kids are struggling in reading, our kids are failing, our kids are behind in this, that. And so we need to come in as a government to support them and help them and educate them. That is not the way to do it. The way that we're going to be a successful country is raising these children to be empowered, to unleash their potential, like Donald Geisinger did for me.
Wonderful.
So that's why I've been serving in education, and that's why I'm running for superintendent of schools in Orange County, so that we can protect our children from what's going on.
Okay, so this position is an elected position.
Yes.
Okay, and so tell us a little bit about the position. What does a superintendent actually do, and what should parents know about working with the superintendent?
That's a great question. So if you think about our education system in the country, it begins with the states run education. Now along came the federal government, and now they have a Department of Ed. And the most that the Department of Ed does is that it provides some guidelines for states, and it also provides funding for certain programs like Title I, Title II, Title III. Then if you look at the state level, there's the Department of Education out of Sacramento. They establish the policies, the programs that go into the district. But before it goes to district, it goes to the counties. So in the county of Orange, the Department of Ed oversees 28 school districts in Orange County. Its purpose is mainly to support, to train, to vet programs that come from Sacramento, to be responsible for fiscal oversight of all 28 school districts. And the superintendent is pretty much the CEO of the Department of Ed in Orange County, should be working closely with the Board of Education for Orange County. Now we've seen in the last several years that's not happening, and that's part of why I want to run. I want to run to really merit or to make it very clear that those two bodies need to partner on behalf of our students and center education around our students. And I always tell people we must focus on educating, not indoctrinating. And we must focus on teaching our kids critical thinking, not critical race theory.
Absolutely.
And those are the types of things that are going on in education right now.
Okay, so does the superintendent work for the board members, or who's the boss here?
That's a great question. The boss is actually the voters.
Okay.
So since both the school board and the superintendent is elected by voters, we are responsible then for our constituents. And as I've been out on the campaign trail, we have had a lot of mama bears, a lot of parents, a lot of families fighting for our campaign because they know what they've seen. They've been disenfranchised with the education system. So they know that if they support our campaign, we will be a voice and an advocate for families and parents and students. And so yes, should I be honored to be elected, I would be responsible to my constituents and my voters.
So you mentioned that in Orange County, it doesn't seem like they're really working together very well. What is the conflict? And what is it that the school board can do? Can they override the decision of a superintendent? Can the superintendent override the decision of a school board?
That's great. So currently the school board consists of 4 conservative individuals and 1 less conservative. And then the current superintendent has really sided with the programs that come out of Sacramento. And as we know, the things that come out of Sacramento are actually about indoctrinating our kids around critical race theory, around the sexualization of our kids, around these mandates that are unnecessary. And so the superintendent has supported those issues coming out of Sacramento. The board has not. So they have been in conflict for the past several years, so much so that they've had lawsuits that they're fighting against each other. And so much of the superintendent's time is not focused on what matters, and that is educating our kids around a STEAM focus, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and more on political issues. It is time to take politics out of education.
Absolutely.
We need to stop using our kids as pawns. And we have seen that with teacher unions. By the way, I was a teacher. I love teachers. They work really hard. Many of them want to do what's best for our kids, but they feel trapped. Because if you look at teachers and you look at the leaders around teachers, who are the teachers supposed to follow? We've got the Department of Education, we've got the Orange County Department of Education, we have superintendents, we have district superintendents, we have principals, we have unions. All of these leaders, adults that are around teachers, are pulling our teachers in so many different ways, so many different directions. It is time to unite and focus really what education should be about, and that is our kids. We've got to protect them from what's coming out of the state. So the board is really trying to do that, and it would be amazing. So we have Mary Barkey, who's the president of the board, Lisa Sparks, and Tim Shaw. They're all up for a re-election. So it would be amazing if we can re-elect this conservative board and then get a conservative. When I mean conservative, I mean faith-based, non-progressive, child-centered beliefs. If we can get that back in both as a superintendent and the board, it's going to be an amazing county, school
Well,
district.
because we want our kids to do some of the basics.
Yes.
Math, writing, spelling, and all those types of things. And who cares about CRT? I mean, our kids are
Right.
naturally friends with a person of any color.
That's right.
And now that this whole agenda with CRT, critical race theory, has been brought into the schools, it's become such a problem.
It's become a problem.
And there's not one person that should be put above another person because of the color of their skin.
That's right.
So I think that we'll talk about CRT and some of those issues in a minute, but talk about the teachers' union. How does this all fit together in the mix of superintendent, school board, and the role that the teachers' union plays in the leadership of the district?
Yeah, so unions have become very powerful, especially in our state, even so in the nation. I mean, when you have unions that can actually go to the governor and influence the governor to continue with the mask mandates, as we just saw, and to continue extending that's power. Unions were established to protect the employees. If you look at in today's world with all the laws and regulations, they are well protected. And so now unions have taken money to actually take a political stance on things, political stances that actually further their agenda. And so that's what unions do. And they send lobbyists, they send activists to this Capitol to then fight for what they believe is right for them. And I've even heard it. Union members say, look, we're not here for the kids. We're here for the adults, the teachers. And partially that is correct, but stop using and abusing your power to then use children as pawns. If you're not to protect the kids, if you say you're not here to protect the kids, then leave them alone. Don't use them as a part of your political strategy. And that's what the unions have done. And a lot of teachers that I've spoken to, a lot of my close friends are teachers, they're tired of it. They see it. They don't want to be a part of the union because they've overreached their authority in education.
Absolutely, and Jonathan, we've seen it through the years as we monitor legislation, as we're reading bills that are coming out of Sacramento, and you look at the supporters of some of the bad bills, CRT, sex education.
Yes.
Who's always supporting that bad legislation, right?
That's right.
Always the
It's
teacher unions.
always the California teachers unions and all their affiliates, and they have not been helpful to the parents, to the families, to the children.
No.
And they are very powerful. And that's why parents need to be at the school district meetings, right? Talk about parents showing up at the school board meetings, why that's so important.
Yeah, I love it. I guess the blessing in disguise of the pandemic is that it really opened up the classroom to parents, through Zoom. so parents got to see what's happening in the classroom. I would say in the past 5-10 years, parents have slowly been shut out of their children's education. Hattie is a prominent research in education. Top 10 factors of a child's success is parental involvement. And yet unions, districts, Sacramento, Department of Ed wants to shut out parent voices. But parent voices will never be shut out. They will rise, as they have in the past couple of years during the pandemic. And even so much so that they'll show up for board meetings monthly, make public comments. They'll write their legislature. They'll make calls. They'll attend Sacramento with Jack Hibbs. He had a lot of families with him as he went to Sacramento. And they'll fight for what? They'll fight for their children. That's the number one priority for parents. And we have this idea or this ideology that we need to shut parents out, so much so that you've heard in the news, that the National School Board Association wrote that letter labeling these parents that come to these board meetings domestic terrorists. And then we find out that they were in bed with the Biden administration to do that, and the DOJ. All of that is part of the game plan of the left to come in and control the minds of our kids. Because if we can't control the mind of our adults, let's start with the young kids who are impressionable. And so, that's why CRT is in there. That is why the sexualization of our kids are there. And that is why our parents are being shut out of education.
Absolutely. And when we say parents, we're talking about grandparents too.
Absolutely.
Because even if your child may be across the state or even across the country, pay attention, because you can still help your grandchildren by knowing what's going on in your own district. But I want to talk about how a person who is not familiar with legislation or what's going on in the school district, how they can become involved and educated. And I'm going to say one of the first things they can do is to just show up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Walk into that meeting, whether it's at the school board or in the Capitol, and sit down, observe, do a little research. And that's the way you become familiar with what's going on in the school district. So tell us about when parents show up at the school district board meeting. What can they expect? What can they do?
Yeah, when they come to a district board meeting, they can expect being provided an agenda of all the topics and issues that the board is going to discuss that day.
And that's public, right?
It's all public, and it has to be public, part of Brown Act. So they can even read and review that 48 hours before the meeting. They can come prepared. Parents can sign up right away to make a 3-minute comment, public comment, on any of the items or even general items on that agenda. And so they certainly should expect other parents making these public comments, even other stakeholders coming in and making public comments. So parents need to know that their voice does matter, and their voice does leave an impression on the school board, and it does leave impression on the leaders of our state and country. So their voice matters. Another place that the parents' voices matter is in the election poll. Parents must do research and become informed on the local candidates first, because those local candidates are the ones that run these school boards, are the ones that become the local, the county superintendent or the judges. And so they have a lot of power in that, and I've seen that. I take heart at what I've seen on the campaign trail, where parents are becoming more active in the community, and it's great. And that momentum is actually building, and it's going to make a difference in this election, and it'll make a difference in the future elections to come. To continue being active I'm glad that you said parents. Parents are grandparents, aunts, uncles, anybody that is a part of the village of raising children. Those are the people that should be invested in this fight for our children.
Absolutely. The children are the future.
Yes.
And they're being educated with this propaganda.
Yes.
Like critical race theory.
Yeah.
We followed that bill from the very beginning. Talk a little bit about what critical race theory is in legislation.
Yeah, well, I think, Gina, it's important that we've all seen, obviously, in our country, of course, there are very dark moments of the country. We fought an entire civil war over the fact that slavery was wrong and it needed to be abolished and ended. And even after that, again, there's no denying that there were evidences and examples of discrimination. We passed a Civil Rights Act and other accompanying pieces of legislation to make sure people were being treated equally. But what you're seeing today with critical race theory, especially with it being pushed down to younger and younger ages, is not the idea that we should be just treating everybody equally and treating everybody with respect and dignity, but really trying to separate and reclassify people based on the color of their skin. And you are either an oppressed class or you are an oppressor class. And some of these examples that we've seen out of schools right here in California have just been heartbreaking, of telling white students, Asian students, if you are not African American or if you're not maybe Hispanic, saying that you are part of an oppressor class, that you have a privilege that is not based on how much education your parents have or how much money they have or where you were born or where you live currently or what your reading capabilities are. I mean, all of those things could be privileges, and we should acknowledge those, sure. But they're talking about privilege purely based on the color of your skin. And then as a result, you should feel bad about that because of your race. You should feel bad about that because of your white privilege, for example. And I mean, again, I don't think any parent, I don't think any conservative I know thinks that we should treat people worse because of their background or because of their ethnicity. I think that every child deserves a chance to grow up and to maximize their God-given potential. And Dr. Bean, that just hearing your story about coming from Vietnam, that is like the epitome of the American dream.
Right.
And I don't understand why we are not telling more of these stories instead of trying to just layer guilt upon guilt and trying to make students, young students, kindergarten, first graders, feel bad because of the race of their genetic heritage.
You know, Gina, these are excellent points that are happening in schools, and this is what I say. Critical race theory doesn't stop racism, it guarantees it.
Absolutely.
And so what I've seen is not only our children are impacted, but it's actually the leaders that are impacted first. That's principals and teachers. And so when you have principals together and they're pitted against each other based on their race, that's racism. When you have teachers then being told that we must include this in read-alouds and lessons. By the way, a lot of people say, well, there's no curriculum for critical race theory, so it doesn't exist in education. This is what the unions are saying about me. So he's wrong. Actually, it shows up in lesson plans, in read-alouds, in a moment where a teacher will say, today we're not going to learn Spanish, today you're going to learn about this ideology. And the teacher will just talk.
Well, they've gotten so clever because critical race theory is the buzzword that everybody's using, but now we know that it's used in so many other ways that they just poo-poo the word, but it's something else. And what are some of the other buzzwords that you know?
I'm so glad you said that. Critical race theory is masked in the buzzwords of diversity, inclusion, and equity, mainly equity. And so, of course, the Bible is about social justice. Christianity is about social justice and equality and equity. But they have taken those biblical principles to hijack it, to wrap it around this thing called Marxism. And so when it gets into the classroom under the guise of equity, the public looks at that and goes, of course we want equity for our kids, right? But it's actually just a euphemism for, all right, we're going to teach you about, just to your point, we're going to teach you about you're the oppressor because you have white skin. You are the oppressed. And so, children, we need to learn that so we don't make those mistakes in the future. And so you should be, you should apologize. And those are just unnecessary. We are all God's human race. We are the melting pot of this country. We are founded by immigrants, Vietnamese immigrants, black immigrants, Hispanic immigrants, all coming together, Irish immigrants, Jewish immigrants, coming together to live together to build this great nation. But it's being torn apart based on race.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about mandates that are coming out of the state. For instance, we fought comprehensive sex ed. When was that? 2018? What year did we fight that? 2018?
Yeah, I think so.
And we fought that for a very long time, Jonathan, and we did our best to make sure that families were aware of what that was. Sadly, it passed into law in California. Now, the school districts are required to teach comprehensive sex ed. We've read the bill many times over and over and over, and we know exactly what it says and what is required. So sometimes I say that the teacher and the school district is in between a rock and a hard place. Can you explain mandates and how the district has to comply with the state mandates? But still, we have teachers and parents that are very upset. And how does that fit? And what do parents do about those state mandates?
Yes, that's a great question. So when a mandate comes from the state, we have to look at it as whether it's been an executive order, whether it's been actual law, whether it's just a policy, and sometimes, and look at the law in general, and sometimes the law in Ed Code is written vaguely enough that allows the local districts to determine. For instance, I forgot what Ed Code it was, but it was an Ed Code that allowed districts to create a policy that would allow 12-year-olds or older to leave campus to go to one of these health clinics or wellness centers without the permission of the parents. Well, that was actually established to give the district the opportunity to create a policy. They didn't have to create the policy. So when districts make policies, the parents should check to see if that's a policy that was created by the district or if that was really handed down by the state and it was interpreted by the district as being mandate.
Well, how's the parent going to find that out?
Well, that's the thing. There's called Public Record Acts. So let's go back to the comprehensive sex ed for a second. Parents, what they can do is ask the district for a under Public Record Act, PRA, for the entire curriculum and everything that's taught in sex ed. And then their parents can make that public to their friends, to the media, to everybody, and then the parents can opt out. Just opt out based on what you see, right? And demand to be opted out. And so when we uncover the curriculum or the policies that a district makes, and we make it publicly known, it puts a lot of pressure on the district's lawyers to think, okay, is this really a law that we must do? Or is this just, we interpret it that way, so we have to create this policy in the district level? And that's what will happen oftentimes. And so that case with the allowing 12-year-olds to go off campus, it actually went through the court system. And the court system said it was not intended that all districts mandate that a 12-year-old can go off campus without the permission of parents. We left it, this Ed Code actually left it up to parents, or left it up to the district to decide whether they wanted that policy or not. And that was the ruling. So we just need to continue to be a part of the education system through boards, meetings, through understanding and just asking the district, under PRA, give it to me. I want to see all of the things you're teaching on ethnic studies. I want to see all the things you're teaching on sex ed. And then once you get that, then you can certainly make it public.
Okay, so parents can find out exactly what's happening, but the school districts are also required to notify parents when they're going to start teaching sex ed, correct?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Talk about that timing.
What's that?
Talk about the timing. When do they have to notify parents?
Well, they already have, right? Since this came out in 2018, they've already notified parents that this is, at what grade levels we're going to teach comprehensive sex ed. And so parents can opt out of that. But I'm more concerned about the other grade levels that they're not teaching comprehensive sex ed, but what they're doing is inserting it in read alouds or lessons. Things about, transgender. I mean, I've been in kindergarten classes where you pull a book and it is clearly a picture on gender identity or a picture book on gender identity. These are topics that even as an adult myself, for me to comprehend, there's unlimited genders based on CDC, by the way.
Yeah.
CDC says there's unlimited genders, identities. I cannot comprehend that. So imagine a kindergartner and first grader, how are they to struggle through that? And it's way too early to even have discussions on that. Now, we as Christians love all people, and we want to love all people. But we also want to protect our children. These types of conversations should happen later and led by the parent, not by the schools.
We're passionate about protecting our children,
Yes.
even children we don't know. And one of the things that's happening in our state and across the nation is parents are pulling their children out of the public school system.
Yes, they are.
They're homeschooling. I'm a former homeschooler myself. But there are many, hundreds of thousands of children who are left in our California public school system. We as adults, as a community, need to continue our work to help and protect all children.
Yes.
And I think that having someone like you in that superintendent position and the board members that you've just identified is critical. We need parents to show up at these school board meetings, run for school board, talk with neighbors about what's going on in the school districts. We need organizations like Jonathan's that will continue to notify us. So Jonathan, I want you to tell people how they can keep up with what's going on in California regarding legislation.
Sure. Well, again, Gina, thank you for having me here today, and it's been great to meet Dr. Bean and to be back at Calvary Chapel Chino Hills. The best way to follow us is on our website and all of our social media. So you go to californiafamily.org. There's a button up there. You can sign up to get notified of all of our emails that we send out. We really try hard not to spam people. So we send 1, maybe 2 emails a week. But we know everybody gets buried. So we want to try to condense the most important information, put it in a once-a-week update that people can review at their leisure. But if you want more, you want to really turn on the fire hose, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We really push out a lot of information there, both the articles that we're publishing, along with little tidbits or commentary. But then we also share a lot of other relevant information. We share videos from Pastor Jack. We share articles from like the California Political Report or from Epoch Times, places like National Review. And then also stories. When myself or Greg Burt, our Director of Capital Engagement, if we're interviewed on a television show or a radio interview, we really try to share those as well so people can hear how the mainstream media is framing the story and then our response and commentary. So those areas, if you go, again, californiafamily.org, that's kind of our central hub. But then if you just search for us, California Family Council on Facebook, at CA Family, the letter C, the letter A, Family on Twitter, and then Instagram is California Family Council. So all that information is available. We have a new young gal, actually a member of Calvary Chapel Chino Hills, Sophia Laurie, who's doing all of our social media now, doing a wonderful job with that. So I encourage you to go follow us there, and you can keep up on everything that we're doing.
And I will say, California Family Council is one of the best. So thank you, Jonathan, for all your hard work. And so, Stefan, tell us, how can people get in touch with you? How can they follow you and keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, which is drbeanoc.com. So that's DR, and then B as in boy, EANOC.com. And on there, they'll be able to really research me as a candidate, my biography, the issues that I stand for. And they can also on there email me, call me directly. And I want to say to the audience, and I want to say to you, thank you so much for having me. It just really gives me courage to know that there are adults, even if they don't have children, that are wanting and willing to fight for our country and protect our children. It reminds me of my wife's last wishes. My wife had been diagnosed with cancer in 2014. She had metastatic breast cancer that metastasized to the brain, and God gave her extended years. So in those 6 years that God gave her, I shared those stories with my wife, and she made me promise her before she passed in 2020 to protect our children. And as I think about that and reflect back, she didn't mean our only 4 children that we have, but she meant protect all of our children. And that reminds me of this forum. It reminds me of this church. It reminds me of all of the people I've met, that everybody is vested in the protection of our kids from what we're seeing in our country. And so Janet had great wisdom in that request, because she wants to see all of us protect all of our children. So thank you for allowing us to come.
Absolutely. And I just really want to thank both of you for standing up and fighting. You know, not everyone has to be a leader or run for school board, but everyone can do something.
Yeah.
Whether it's showing up at a school board, talking to family and friends, and people that tune into a program like this become more informed. So that way, when you're together with people that are interested, you have something to say. You have some knowledge about what's going on in our country and our community. And so thank you very much for coming with joining us today. And so thank you everyone for joining us today. And we'll be back next month, bringing you some more information about what's going on in our state. And God willing, the victories will come in November and in this election for you, Dr. Bean. So thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
God bless you.